So today we're going to do a video recorded lecture on popular culture and the art of self-governance. This far, for this week, you've read articles about Extreme Makeover Home Edition, as well as Oprah's endorsement of The Secret. You also watched episodes from each of those television series. And so hopefully by now, while you're watching the shows and completing the readings, it began to resonate with the lesson we did last week on capitalism and neoliberalism as ideological forces that structure our experience. And so some of the work we did last week, we're bringing into this week's core lesson plan and course to begin to work with it in concrete examples. And so I want us to be thinking about how neoliberalism as an ideology infiltrates and impacts our own personal and cultural actions. And again, remember, it works as an ideology because it doesn't appear as such. It appears normal to us and common sense. And so we're trying to really unpack that. So just a quick note, you'll notice the top of the homepage for the course, I've added a weekly schedule. This is the schedule for the course. You have between Monday and Thursday roughly to complete the course readings and watch the clips. By Thursday night, post your first response to the discussion board. On Friday, post to the Instagram account. And on Sunday, complete the weekly lesson and then post your reply to the discussion board. We also have the course learning goals. And we'll be beginning each lesson from here on out with a list of the learning objectives for this lesson. And CLO 1 and CLO 4, you don't have to necessarily pay attention to. That's for my own knowledge. Those are the course learning objectives that they correspond to. But this is hopefully going to provide sort of an orientation point for where to direct our energies as we go through the lesson and the readings. And so what we're hoping to get out of this particular lesson is understanding television as a cultural technology and analyzing reality television texts and their social contexts. And so again, that's moving, as we did last week, between text and context. So one thing to think about is popular culture as a lived social practice. James Hay and Laura Youette, as quoted in the textbook, define popular culture as a cultural technology. And in doing so, they argue that it's part of broader institutions of politics and commerce. And so popular culture fits within these and isn't necessarily outside of them. And in doing so, it helps construct our cultural identities and practices because of the nature of communication and media and culture. These are the resources we have to understand ourselves and understand the social setting we are in, and as well as other people and places beyond our immediate experience. And so the way popular culture functions right now is that it constructs these identities within market structures. And so one of the things that Kara and Lowe point out is that the experience of the ordinary person is central to hegemony. We have to sort of have an expectation, an idea of what ordinary people are doing. And what claims and practices does popular culture make about ordinary people? And beginning a few decades ago, reality television emerged and provided an insight, at least, or a depiction of ordinary people in a way we hadn't seen as forcefully before. And so these two texts, Extreme Makeover Home Edition and Oprah Winfrey Show, both contribute to our understanding of everyday people and their struggles. And that's why the discourses employed on the show are very instructive in helping us understand how we narrate stories and what values are being exposed during these texts. And so this is one of the reasons we study these. And so in thinking about television as a cultural technology, we want to think that reality television prepares viewers for the tasks of daily life under neoliberal governance. And we can think back to the brief clip from last week of What Not to Wear. And of course, if you watched that show at any length, and it probably came through in the brief clip we watched, that you can tell obviously you will never get a promotion if you are not dressed correctly. And dressing correctly has a very narrowly defined set of ideals and values. And anyone familiar with home magazines or women's magazines of any kind is also quite familiar with the sort of way that we are instructed to keep our houses clean, and so on and so forth. And so part of what cultural technologies do is they cultivate proper tastes and desires. And so these are very class-based. Um, and of course, we're always aspiring to do better. That's part of what consumer culture does. And so, what are the proper tastes and desires we should have? We're also creating ideal consumers for the marketplace, and any number of shows demonstrate this. But I was trying to keep count during the episode of Extreme Makeover we watched about how many different companies were brought in and kind of commercial plugs there were. And I lost count after 5, but it was well above that. And so not only, and you probably noticed too, you were watching commercials in between the show. And so for that entire hour of television, we were being sold things. And they also were cultivating an audience that would be interested in consuming these products. And another function is to create the ideal consumer for the marketplace. And we see this quite explicitly in Janice Peck's chapter on Oprah, where she talks about how Oprah's audience is largely upper middle class women with spending money. And so when Oprah was giving away cars or her list of her favorite things, these were also symbiotic relationships between the Oprah Winfrey Show and these products, every bit as much as Sears is using Extreme Makeover Home Edition to plug their own wares. And then finally, we produce a compliant citizenry, and I think this shows up quite forcefully in both the analyses of how the charity work done on both Oprah and Extreme Makeover Home Edition mask the structural deficiencies of neoliberal ideology in terms of its social value. And so we're going to talk about that in more detail. And right now, let's think about how it does this. And it does this by producing audiences as desired consumers. It tells us how to enjoy ourselves. And so if you can think about watching, Oprah or any of the Food Network shows, they talk about like how and why you should enjoy the things they want you to be enjoying. And then in doing this, it all has an educational function. It teaches viewers about success and the good life. And so the media works in several ways, and Kara and Lowe want to kind of narrow it out this way. The media is the means through which we access reality beyond our immediate experience. And so we can't possibly know everything about the world, but a lot of what we know about the world outside of our immediate experience comes from mediated images and reality. They also speak on our behalf and of our interests. And so ultimately, when we take these two things and combine them, the media just communicates its power and its centrality to how we produce our identities, culture, and social relationships. And so that is really what the media is communicating, even as it's communicating all this other content. This item on the right, the media's power and its centrality to our identities and relationships, is the overarching communication that is happening. And one of the ways that happens is through our participation in surveillance. And so it's participation and surveillance. It could also be participation in surveillance. And so with reality television especially, but throughout the history of television and media, we're encouraged to judge other ordinary people. We watch TV, we talk about the show, we talk about what a good singer somebody is or is not, how they dance. And the judges are there giving us ideas about what we should be judging them on. And so one of the things that that authors note is that the rules of the game are not questioned. They are set up by the judges. When we watch America's Next Top Model, no one's stopping and saying, "What do you mean smile with your eyes?" That's assumed. It's assumed that these are experts that know exactly what needs to happen, and it's how well do the contestants comply with those requirements. And so we're asked to participate as judges, as fans, as audience members, and this is connected to surveillance technology, such as cell phones and the internet. And we're all very familiar now with the notion that we are being tracked by advertisers, by Facebook wanting to sell our information to advertisers and data mining companies, that our cell phones are possibly being tracked by the NSA, or that companies might be listening in. There was a recent lawsuit against a television company for creating a voice recorder that would record your conversation in your living room or around your TV. It wasn't disclosed to their consumers, and so they had to settle a very large lawsuit. But these are surveillance technologies, and it's this work, the way social media and television combined encourage us to use them. And so American Idol actually was seminal in making text messaging normalized within the United States. We were one of the last countries to catch on to texting, and AT&T partnered with American Idol with this, text to vote for your favorite. And of course, you had to pay for every text messaging, unless here we've got get unlimited text voting for a month if you sign up today. And but they keep on encouraging you to text. And so surveillance technologies, critical scholars argue, create a digital enclosure where our participation is tracked. And we're used to this. We know that this is happening in some ways. Sometimes we find it very convenient. But this normalizes surveillance and monitoring as ordinary practices. And so through this technology, neoliberal surveillance is becoming normalized. And then this impacts our political participation as well. So not only do we vote on American Idol or Dancing with the Stars, we also wind up are asked to participate through these technologies in our civic culture. So we have on the left, this is a screenshot from CNN.com Live with Facebook, where they want us to think about what we're watching as we're watching a live stream of Obama's economic speech. And we've got quite a bit of nonsense, really, on the side. The Twitter toss-up. So, watching the presidential debates, so are we. As public participation ramps up during these showdowns of political prowess, we're keeping tabs on Twitter. Check out the latest data from debate number 1, October 3rd, 2012. So this is a Obama-Romney matchup. But performance.com is encouraging us to tweet and to follow them, so that we can participate in the roundup of the debate. And you can see here the amount of information they've got about the people tweeting. So English speakers, Spanish French, Spanish Portuguese retweets. And so you've got some numbers about how they were, what was happening on Twitter during the debate. It also facilitates commercial and political processes. And so, again, this digital enclosure, political strategists are following what is happening on Twitter, and this is what we're tweeting while we're following the work political strategists have done. And so there's this real sort of feedback loop that is very kind of closed off from external realities at a particular point. And so this is a chart looking at average sentiment in tweets during the debate, aggregated in 5-minute intervals. Now, of course, this data doesn't tell us much about what those sentiments were or how they defined the sentiment. There are standardized ways that have gone through peer review and are used by people who do this work to distinguish that. But they don't give us that information in this chart. And so one of the questions is, the media then organizes our participation in popular culture and politics. And so through media technologies, we are participants and creators of culture and political action. But what is the cost? And so a lot of attention is being paid lately to the government's access to social media as a surveillance tool. And so this story is from October 11th of 2016. The ACLU was reporting that the police use surveillance tools to scan social media. And then this is a story about the same thing from even earlier, from September 23rd. And this has come to a head in the past few weeks, where border agents have been known to ask people for their passwords. And so there is a lot of conversation happening right now in the political sphere about what are the possibilities for that? What right to privacy do people have? And how should we handle this? How do you interpret someone's social media feed? And so this is an article from just a few days ago that appeared in The Atlantic, writing about it, and its possible implications. And so one of the things is we often don't think about what could happen or how this information could be used, or that we're even doing it. So neoliberalism has become so pervasive, its logic has extended into our daily patterns of thinking and liberalism. We talked about the economic doctrine of neoliberalism last week, but what does it look like socially speaking? And so some of the results of the sort of interest in free markets, deregulation, no taxes, very low taxes on the wealthy and on corporations, as well as free trade, have led to things such as corporate downsizing, increased income inequality. And remember how the balloon, as it stretched up, the bottom got heavier and it fell beneath the social net. Well, the privatization of previously public services, such as healthcare, education, and prison, have led to removal of the social welfare state. And so we see these two things happening in tandem, privatization and a dismantling of the welfare state. And so currently our education costs much more than it did 30 to 40 years ago. Prisons, we're spending much more on prison than we had been before. And our healthcare costs, as everyone is aware, are skyrocketing. And so there's increased costs for education. We're spending more money. At the same time, our wages are much lower, and we have less job security than we did, than previous generations have. And so within that then, what is reality television's value system? What do the watching shows such as Extreme Makeover Home Edition, What Not to Wear, Oprah, what do we come to learn about how to behave? We should comply with the rules. It discourages questioning the rules. It promotes a social hierarchy. There's always winners and losers, and we all get a vote. Self-governance. We're supposed to take care of ourselves, be ingenious. Self-improvement. We're always trying to improve ourselves. Almost every episode of Oprah was about some way to be better. It directs viewers at the same time to behaviors that are commercially viable. And so most of the time, a lot of these cures involve buying things. They reinforce the economic and cultural power of the media. And Kara and Lowe take great care to note that the media might not have particular interest in a given political project. It produces what makes commercial sense. And so they take all that together to mean that popular culture works in an implicit and indirect way, shaping the cultural resources and practices we engage with in making sense of our world and our lives and our relations with others. And so we can identify these motivations and ideologies in popular culture, but as we talked about last week, we can't stop at that critique. We need to see it in context to look at how it shapes the resources and practices we have. And one of the reasons popular culture is such an important site for examination is that it is our shared resource as a society. It is, we develop our identities from it, we use it when we talk to each other, and it becomes the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, which is how Victor Turner, a famous anthropologist, defined culture. The stories we tell ourselves about. So one of the things that both these shows emphasize, and neoliberalism in general emphasizes, is personal responsibility. So we make judgments on how well a contestant or person complies with the rules. We don't talk about the rules themselves. We ignore how the rules reflect broader social and political structures. And what this does, in effect, is obscure social relations and how they are produced, even as the television narrative itself pretends to show us how things really are. So we've got charity TV. It provides social services for needy and deserving families. It does not situate the needs of these families in wider power relationships. It teaches ordinary people values. And within that, integrates brands and products into welfare provision. And so Graham Palmer's chapter on Extreme Makeover Home Edition has, an American fairy tale. But I think he really questions whether it is or not. These are families that are in desperate situations. They've been abandoned by state agencies. only those lucky enough to have a community can make it. And for the video of the people in the neighborhood, the neighbors, the family members talking about how deserving the family is, was a weekly trope within the show. And so within that comes a particular ideology about home and community. It's a place to retreat to. It means to keep the family together. And in the episode we watched for class, we saw that very explicitly, right? She was worried if she passed away, her daughters would be separated, but now they can all stay together in this home. The designers teach working class families taste. And so the way they went through that house and judged it, evaluated it at the beginning of the episode, the things they chose to put in there for the final product, what seemed necessary in making that house and building that house was a way of teaching taste, but also proper cultivation of values. And so the children should all have individual fridges and bedrooms. This should reflect their individualism with these kind of high-end designs. And so in the meantime, though, the working class families, the needy families, teach the designers about real people. And so we have the narratives and the screen interviews with the design team just talking about how wonderful the family is, how amazing what this woman has done with these children is, and how meaningful it is to help them out in this way. And that's not to say that that's insincere. You can have both, right? We can be amazed at what this family is accomplishing while also thinking critically about what this narrative is doing and how it's talking about what this family is accomplishing and how they can be helped. Also, the community appears in the episode very strongly through local press, the people who help with the labor, and the businesses. And so they have the contractor who sends all his workers over, and then later on they call him and he's ringing the bell at the stock exchange in New York. And you've got the camp that comes in to help as well as I think it was an Air Force regiment that comes in to, or some sort of military group that comes in to help haul the clay up to the workshop that they built. We also have an emphasis on heterosexual families as the social ideal. And so it maintains a very conservative tradition of the nuclear family in a home, like a one family home. And that family is heterosexual. Even in this episode, there wasn't a father, but there also wasn't a wife or a second mother. So, and so these are the sort of values and how we construct who is deserving of this intervention. And so in teaching these values, the political function is linked to the commercial system. And that's being done explicitly through the show and how they're purchasing things for people. And so you've got sponsorship agreements. There's a symbiotic branding relationship Extreme Makeover Home Edition has with Sears. Local businesses are positioned as charitable. Therefore, they're like the working class heroes of the area. And it's always a promotion for ABC, for the network. And oftentimes the contestants, as Palmer points out, thank ABC within the narrative of the show. So brands come to the rescue, embedding themselves within narratives of personal responsibility. And what does that look like? It looks exactly like this. Like this. We've got the Sears Extreme Makeover Home Edition Craftsman Saw. And so you've got items that were featured on this week's show. You can roll over them, and they tell you what the tools they used were. And then you can, it's about one deserving family each week. And you can see how Sears can go to extremes for you. And so Sears and Extreme Makeover are mutually embedding themselves within this relationship. Right, so the narratives of personal responsibility on the show become DIY, let your dreams take shape, we'll help you. So brands are part of the community building process, and they exemplify liberal social practices and values. And here we see that these are some things Oprah's endorsed. Her book club, the authors write about extensively in the textbook. It was credited at the time with making reading popular again. And certainly all these books became bestsellers or re-enter the bestseller list as they were chosen. She also is a spokesperson for Weight Watchers. And so the Weight Watchers narrative meets with her personal ideology of, the mind cure, right? You can do it, you just have to work hard at it, and so on. And so somehow, if we think about diet foods and Weight Watchers, all these diet programs tell us is that we can, lose weight by eating, which is counterintuitive when you think about it. And then Oprah also wants us to improve our lives by thinking positive thoughts. So there we have it, those two things coming together as exemplifying social practices and values. And so on the whole, what this branding symbiosis results in is capitalism becomes positioned in these narratives then as a responsive force meeting community needs rather than a system devoted to maximizing profits. And so it obscures the nature of capitalism and positions it as a helpful force within our neoliberal structures that leave people on the outside, out in the cold. So these discourses mask material structural constraints as personal deficiencies. And this is a piece of street art I found surfing the internet. Every morning I wake up on the wrong side of capitalism. And I thought that given the sort of way Extreme Makeover Home Edition and Oprah are positioning, waking up on the wrong side of things as more of a personal deficiency. I think that this quote kind of turns that on its head. It's not the wrong side of the bed. It's not your attitude. It's perhaps the economic system. And so these discourses mask those constraints and construct them as personal deficiencies. And that allows the haves, right, the upper middle class Oprah Winfrey audience or those watching Extreme Makeover Home Edition from the comfort and safety of their own homes that don't need to be made over, relax in the knowledge that what they have is the result of their positive attitudes, and therefore they're deserving of it. And it frees them from any responsibility to their less successful neighbors, because clearly they are personally deficient. And so the lack of success is self-induced. And therefore these people that haven't succeeded don't actually need our material help. And so, Oprah has been known to say, you create your own reality by the way you think and therefore act. And so if you're not thinking properly, you're not acting properly, and your reality will be off. And so I want to posit this question of reality television as a form of mutual exploitation. These shows do the ideological work of masking the cracks in the current social system. The state is failing communities as neoliberalism encourages the privatization of previously public goods and services. We not only are making less money, but we have to spend more money on things that used to be provided for us. And so commercial media and private enterprise promise to fill the gap in this care, but only to particular individuals and families who are deemed deserving by our dominant ideological standards. And so we watch this, and in some ways it's exploitative of the families being served. It's what some might call disaster porn or charity porn. But we're also being exploited as we're being sold this narrative. And I want to turn to Barbara Ehrenreich. She has, this is an RSA Animate video of a longer speech she gave called Smile or Die. She's a journalist who's written several best-selling books looking at the economy and social relationships. And this is some work she's done looking at the narrative of the power of positive thinking that was so popular in 2007 and that the Oprah chapter covers.
Within a few years, I began to encounter the same ideology of positive thinking being applied to people who were downsized from the corporate world, white-collar, middle-level people, being sent to support groups or networking groups. There are all kinds of names for these things, where the message was, hey, it's not bad to be laid off. It's actually a good thing. It's actually an opportunity. It's a growth opportunity, and you will come out of it much better. And if you want to come out of it all, of course, you better work on your attitude, because the key to getting a job in today's corporate world is not knowing things or having skills or experience, but having a positive attitude. Somebody who's in an absolute low point in their lives, and certainly losing a job can be that, and just tell them, that's nothing wrong. Just put on a smiley face and get on with it, and don't complain, whatever you do. So then I began to see a pattern and find it in more and more aspects of American life. This kind of mandatory optimism and cheerfulness. One area where it is very strongly concentrated now, and has been for some years, is the corporate world, the workplace, where the idea has been, yes, indeed, you better be positive, because you're not really there to do X or Y tasks. You're there to spread good cheer and make the other people around you comfortable and happy all day. Now, you might think, what's wrong with that? I mean, certainly many people have asked me, well, all right, so it's delusional to think everything is okay, or to go to the real delusional extreme. Embedded in all this is the idea that you change the physical world with your thoughts. When you send thoughts out from your mind, they exert a force that brings things to you that you want. So if I were, we're doing this right, we could all concentrate on getting $1 million or whatever, and indeed it would come. There have been a lot of attempts to explain this scientifically. For a while it was magnetism, that thoughts must exert a magnetic force that draws things to you. As we know, however, our heads are not attracted to refrigerators. The magnetic force is so tiny that is exerted. Now they talk about quantum physics. I love that. Quantum physics, for some reason, have become an excuse to mock all of science. See, nothing real, nothing true, and whatever you think, that's how the world is. So if you think positively, you remake the world positively, according to this pseudoscientific explanation. But anyway, what's wrong with this? Why not delude yourself into thinking, everything's fine and that you can change the world with your thoughts? And I have two problems with it. One, I'll be hardline about this. I think delusion is always a mistake. There's no safe delusions. Although one of the messages of positive psychology in the United States is, it's good to have some positive delusions about yourself. I think the biggest evidence to that is the financial meltdown of '07. Now, a lot of things went into that, like extreme class inequalities of the United States and your country too. Greed and economies based increasingly on finance rather than manufacturing or anything. But certainly one element was the grip of positive thinking in the corporate world, and particularly in the financial sector. I mean, people who tried to raise problems in the middle of the last decade would be shut up or fired. You couldn't be inside Countrywide Mortgage Company, which was the one that it's almost single-handedly set off the whole collapse in the U.S., and say, I'm worried about our subprime mortgage exposure, or you'd be out. And I got to interview some Wall Street guys, very successful Wall Street guys. They said this is just how it is. You can't, people who tried, say within Lehman Brothers, to point out that the housing prices could not rise forever, were fired. So it was this willful ignorance. Nobody could think bad thoughts, nothing bad, and if you didn't, nothing bad would happen. And I think the other thing that I find very, very disturbing about it is I just think it's cruel. I mean, it's cruel to take people who are having great difficulties in their lives and tell them it's all in their head, and they only have to change their attitude. And my favorite example of this moral callousness is from the author of The Secret. That was a bestseller here too, admit it. The book on how you can have anything you want, attract anything to yourself by thinking. And she was asked about the tsunami of '06 and how happen. And she said, in kind of paraphrasing, that those people, the victims of it, must have been sending out tsunami-like vibrations into the universe to attract that to themselves, because nothing happens to us that we don't attract. And I think that's beyond amorality. I don't even know where to locate that. I'm not advocating gloom and pessimism or negativity or depression. Those can also be delusional. I mean, you can go around, making up a story to yourself that everything you undertake is going to fail. And there's no reason to think that. My very radical suggestion is realism. Just trying to figure out what is actually happening in the world and seeing what we can do about those parts of it that are threatening or hurtful. My background is in science, and I think, there's not one fixed truth or reality, but we close in on something. And we think, this is as good as we can understand for now, until we get better information, but try to act on that. I think I would make a case that we are hardwired to be vigilant. I mean, yes, we have many other capabilities, to be jolly, to experience camaraderie, solidarity, all of those great things. But we're hardwired to be vigilant and on guard. That's how our very distant ancestors survived, not by saying, everything's probably okay, don't worry about the motion in the tall grass over there. The people who survived said, move, it's a leopard, let's go. George W. Bush. George W. Bush was a cheerleader in college. Not an athlete, but a cheerleader. And I think he construed the presidency as a continuation of that role. He is one of the people who closed himself in the bubble of positive feeling. Condoleezza Rice said, way too late, that she had doubts about the invasion of Iraq, but she didn't dare express them because the president hated to be around, quote, pessimists. See the equation of pessimism with doubt. So nobody raised any questions about that war within the hearing of the president. Or those that did, like the general who suggested that we were only putting half as many troops on the ground as would be needed to accomplish whatever we were trying to accomplish, he was pushed out of the way. He lost his job, essentially. What could be cleverer as a way of quelling dissent than to tell people who are in some kind of trouble, poverty, unemployment, etc., that it's all their attitude, that's all that has to change, that they should just get with the program, smile and get no complaining. It's a brilliant form of social control, which, by the way, was practiced in the Soviet Union. One of the principles of Soviet communism was optimism. So it's a form of social control, by the way, that is quite widespread, has been widespread in totalitarian types of societies, but I think it has worked very well in America. Take the issue of class inequality. How could that be a problem if anybody can become rich by thinking about it? If any one of us can just attract wealth to ourselves, there's no issue. Somebody raised a parallel to what we call market fundamentalism, right? The idea that the market, the invisible hand, will straighten everything out. That you don't have to intervene, you don't have to have policies, you don't have planning, because there's this miraculous force that just irons out everything. Well, maybe a couple of generations get crushed along the way, but it's basically, I think it completely overlaps with the positive thinking ideology. You don't really have to do anything because there is this benevolent, invisible deity, the market, that will clear everything up. And I tell people, you want to really take a mental leap, a sort of a kind of belief. Believe that we could change things. It's the powerlessness of positive thinking, because it always just envisions you as a lone individual changing the world. Or not changing the world, redesigning the world to fit your ideas. But we do have strength. We do have power. We have collective power, which we could use to make changes that would end a great deal of unnecessary suffering in the world.
Okay, I want to really hone in on Ehrenreich's last point there, where positive thinking, another way that doctrine reflects neoliberalism, is neoliberalism reduces everything to the individual. There really isn't a sense of a social within neoliberalism. And so positive thinking, as she identifies, is a very individualistic act, but it also forecloses the possibility of collective political action and engagement. And so, in being told to simply think positive, we're not being asked to think about our conditions and how we contribute to them or construct them as a collective, as a society. And I think that that is one of the sort of perfect ways to end the encapsulation of how neoliberalism and the sort of mind cure and work that reality television does impact our social lives. And so thank you for listening, and please proceed to the quiz and the discussion question.